Welcome back to part 5 of this video series where we cover creating a debugger for your add-on that's invisible to your users, along with an interface function so that you can call in your interfaces in a lot more structured manner. We'll also cover adding an add to menu and organizational techniques to make your add-on a little more clean for the UI. Let's jump right in. Alright, we're going to start out by building our debugger panel. A debugger panel can be used to help you troubleshoot your add-on. You can use all kinds of things for debugging, but in this case, since we have a time recorder, we want to be able to troubleshoot and play with the times and take a look at a couple of other parameters while we are developing our add-on. So we don't have to sit around and wait for things to happen. So go ahead and do Shift A, and under Interface, we're going to go to Panel. Let's change the name to Debugger. And on the polling section, polling is what is used to determine whether or not the panel will show up. So if you drag on out, there's a special node that is called isAddonExport. You combine this with an invert Boolean, Shift A, and go to S, or you can do Shift A and go to Converters, invert Boolean. And when you export your add-on, what will happen is the combination of these two nodes will allow you to hide this panel by setting the poll value to false. But when you're developing the add-on and you compile, you'll be able to see the panel and troubleshoot your add-on or test it. Now we can continue to add UI items to this debugger, but I want to introduce another useful UI node that is called the interface function node. Let's drag on out, run interface function for the functions. You have a run interface function node. Now currently we don't have any interface functions, so let's go ahead and make a graph for one. Shift A, and under functions, we have an interface function. And it has a yellow diamond, so it'll execute interface elements. And we'll just go ahead and copy this. And just make sure you paste with just slightly a different name, so we don't match our graph. So on our interface function, what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll set ourselves up with the open date and open time properties. Let's click on our getter interface, and we're going to need to grab the scene for both of these. These properties we can drag out here. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and go to full screen mode. Back to our time recorder and grab our scene context. And we want to grab the in and not any of the outs. You can only copy the ins and paste them on a new graph. Notice how we have a change in color now. Let's go ahead and quickly relabel our out to out scene portal. And we'll minimize these. Before we compile, we need to attach the UI FN debugger back onto our main time recorder graph. Shift R to compile, and look at that. So currently we don't have anything that's running to set this data other than on load for our file. And this also doesn't look very good showing up along rows. So instead what we can do is we can set up columns. This is where we're going to introduce some additional UI elements. So rather than dragging out layouts and applying the rows, we're going to move these over to the side and add in another node. And we're looking for the column node. And I'll compile just to show you how that changes things. Notice how we are organizing our UI elements vertically. Column will create vertical organization. You can set up to do a line so that it will take away all space between the elements. Now in this case, we don't necessarily need to align, so we can turn that off. Now if we do enabled, that will gray them out so they can't be interacted with, and alert will turn some UI elements red. We can change the Y scale, and we can change the X scale. In this case, we don't have anything along rows, so you're not going to see the X being scaled. Let's just change those back and compile. All right, let's go ahead and add a few more items to our UI interface. Now, we're going to add some additional things below, but what we can do is create some additional space by adding in a separator. So drag out, go to your interface, and we're looking for a separator. And when you compile now, you'll notice that we've added a little bit of space. The more you give this value, the more space you have. We only need a space of 1 for now. We can duplicate our column. So in order to get our add-on to grab and save the time, we need to start the tracking and end the tracking. So we can do that with some buttons. But in order to use the buttons, we'll have to call some custom operators. Let's create our buttons first for the blockout. So interface button, and we'll set on this one start tracking, duplicate down lower, and end tracking. Pile, you won't see anything because the button is not calling any custom operators. Now you could change the Serpens icon to the Blender icon and you could paste in operators instead, but in this case we're going to make some custom ones. So let's go ahead and set up 2 new graphs, one for start tracking and one for end tracking. Operators start with the designation OT. Add in just a little bit of a dash here, and we'll do another graph for end tracking. Shift A, and under Program, we have the operator node. And we already have functions that we want to use for starting the tracking, but on our time recorder, notice how we've got 2 things that are happening when we load our file. We start tracking and we move in the session time into our previous session time. Well, let's go ahead and combine all of these into their own function, and then we'll tie them into the operator itself, and we can clean up this business here by running just one function. So let's go ahead and make a new function on a new graph. Copy that. Add in a function, paste in the name, get rid of that dash to make the name just slightly different, and we can call in everything requested here. Hit Control C and come here and Control V. Now that we've got that function set up, we can come back to our time recorder and we can delete these nodes and reselect this to start tracking and set previous session. Let's go ahead and move our function up to the other functions, and then on our operator we can use the same run function node. We'll have an end tracking operator. Now the structure for Blender is to use operators with buttons, and then you have operators call functions to do all the heavy lifting. Don't try to do too much execution with the operators because I've had problems with those. I don't think Blender is really optimized to make operators handle a ton of events or a ton of program flow. So make the function do that instead. Tie your operators into functions. So now we got both of our operators defined. We can go back to our UI debugger and we can select the operators for our buttons. Now when we compile, let's go back away from full screen. You'll notice we have 2 buttons for start and end tracking. Let's go ahead and give these an icon as well. And now's a good time, if you haven't already gotten it, to go to my Gumroad page and you can grab all the icons set up for creating this add-on. Now I'll go to my custom icons, and we've got a green clock and a red clock that are part of the icons package. You go ahead and load those now. And I'm going to go ahead and grab their getters and we'll set them in green for the start and red for the end. Compile and notice how we've got our icon set up on our button. Now, these buttons are a little close together, so what we can do is we can change the Y scale and align them to remove that white space, give them a scale of 2. So now our buttons have a little more room for the mouse to click on them. So we click on Start Tracking, notice how it changes our date, and we set up our time. Let's go ahead and display all of these parameters. We'll have the open time in minutes, the total time in minutes, we'll do the session time in minutes, and the previous time in minutes. So all of these, we shouldn't need the current time. So we can duplicate out our column, set it down. We will set down a separator as well, just to give ourselves a little bit of white space. And when I have to move my nodes, I typically move the interface node close by so I can connect, and then I move it back when I'm done. All right, so let's go ahead and grab these properties. So we'll go ahead and get the open or save time in minutes. Total time. Take up the session time as well. And we'll grab in the previous session time. Don't forget to get all of your outputs for your scene portals, because these are scene properties, and they all need to reference the scene object data. Connect these in line. I move it somewhere around the middle there. Now when we build this, we've got some nice big properties that we can change. Now we probably don't need this set to 2. Maybe we can set it down to 1.5. There we go. That looks really nice. So I could change the open time to be a different time, or we can reset the total time. So we could set this back down to maybe 5 and set our session time to 1. So when we start tracking and end tracking, set this back down to 0. We can move the open time back just a little bit and hit end tracking, and notice how we can test our add-on out. Something is not right with the previous session timer. We're supposed to be able to set the session time into the previous time when we hit start tracking. Wonder what's going on. Okay, I know what the problem is. So after a little bit of troubleshooting, what ended up happening was, when we copied this over, notice how I said don't ever copy the out scene. We've gotten out, but we have no in. And the portals need the scene context in order to grab the session time. So in this case, we can come into the scene context, copy these in, go back into our function, got a new orange color, change our node label. Do a little troubleshooting session here. Trying to figure out why it wasn't updating. We got live troubleshooting in the video, look at that. So now when we test our add-on, this is a perfect time for troubleshooting in the debugger. So we're going to compile, bring it on back, and we'll do start tracking. Hey, look at that, we've moved our session time over. And we could zero all these out, so set this to 0, set that to 0. We do start tracking again, and we're moving our session time in. All right, let's go ahead and move on back. Going to add in our 3D viewport. When we're modeling in the viewport itself, perhaps maybe we want to see the time here. So we'll go ahead and add in a menu. And this is a special kind of menu. It's called an add to menu. So I make a graph for it. And where are we going to be adding it? Well, when you're changing your context around for your workspace, we have a 3D viewport. And if you click on the 3D viewport, let's go to somewhere else and come back to the 3D viewport. If you look at your info, you'll notice that it is called the View 3D. So I typically like to name this the same as those names, and that'll remind you what they are when you're actually trying to access them in the code. Let's go ahead and Shift A, and under Interface, we have ourselves an Add to menu. And we'll drag this out just a little bit so we can see our menu. When you click on it, you'll notice every location that you can add to a currently created menu. We want to add this at the end where all these icons are. We'll append it at the end. And then we're going to go ahead and grab in the total time. And we just need a label along with an icon. Let's grab our custom icons. I'm actually bringing the icon over here. And we'll grab in our total time, get the property, and let's go ahead and grab in our scene. Control C, Control V. Take our purple portal. Connect it over here. Let's go full screen. Enter our total time data into the text for the label. And now we leave our full screen mode and we hit compile. We've got ourselves a timer icon and the number. It would be nice to have that number in front of the icon. So what we can do is we can just duplicate the label, bring it down, and we can join these into a row. The row will keep these two items close together, and then you can change the X spacing for them. So let's shift these over just a little bit. We'll add in a Shift A, interface, and row. The icon over to the bottom node and leave the total time on the top node. If we set the align, we can scale in the X direction. Let's compile first to see how it looks. So because they're aligned in a row, we've got quite a bit of space. We can bring that space in. So let's go to something like 0.65 and compile again. Yeah, it looks pretty good. We're in the hundreds and we're not cutting off any numbers. Let's go ahead and bring our time down to like 5 or something to see if we can show what the thousands look like. So let's hit end tracking. So total time 1614. So we're not cutting it off. Let's decrease this down a little bit more and recompile. Okay, so that's not going to work. We're cutting off the numbers. So 0.6. Looks like 0.65 is the way to go. And look at that. Now when we go to our 3D viewport, we've got our total time. Now we could add a little bit of a separator here to keep it away from the other icons and menus. So click on this up arrow. We can drag this one out here. And from the top row, we can add in a separator. Go ahead and compile again. And let's give it a factor of 2. Yeah, we'll add one more on the bottom of that as well. We can minimize these, clean them up just a little bit. Compile now. Got a nice clean UI. That's beautiful. Look at that. In the next video, we're going to cover the Pomodoro timer, and that allows Serpens interface from the nodes to Python code. And as we build that timer, we'll be able to go in and out of the node code to take out properties and run a timer on the side so that we don't have to continually save. We can have another timer that will tell us when to take breaks. If you're looking forward to seeing more about interfacing with scripts in Python, stick around for the next video. We'll see you then.